I think we're going to get started. I am so excited on this webinar to have our friends and colleagues from Source Intelligence, Jackie Lowy and Xander File, who I'm going to let introduce themselves because they both have really impressive backgrounds, and I think it's always more interesting than just reading someone's bio. We're going to try to have today be a very practical session on what we've learned from working in the field of crisis management. We're going to sort of do a back and forth, and then at the end we're going to have an open Q&A session, and we'll invite everybody from among our attendees to ask any question you want of Xander, Jackie, and myself. One of the fun things about crisis management is you really do see everything. The many different fun situations that we've worked on together. And I'm really just excited to dive into that with Jackie and Xander. They're a highly trusted partner of Miller Inc. We've brought them in to many different crisis situations that we've been working on for intelligence work, digital reputation management work, research, and they're some of the best in the field and certainly our favorite partner to work with. So excited to chat more. But maybe Jackie, if you could start. Jackie's here with me in LA, and then Xander, if you could just share a little bit about yourself.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Nate. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Lowy. As Nate mentioned, I am a founder of Source Intelligence, which is a private intelligence firm based here in Los Angeles, California. We work with Nate a lot on probably more of the cyber side of anything that he really needs. In terms of myself and my background, I served in the military in Israel for about 4 years, and then I came back to Los Angeles, transitioned into the private sector in security consulting, and that's where I met my partner, Alex File. We noticed a huge gap in open source intelligence underutilization, and that's what we do. We fill in those gaps in terms of just collecting all of that information that's readily available, whether it's business intelligence, competitor analysis, reputation management, or cybersecurity, even hacks, which is something that we're going to speak about today. We kind of take care of that. So that's my background. And Xander, if you want to just chime in a little bit about your background, and we'll get this started.
Sure. So yeah, as Jackie and both Nate said, my name is Alex File. Started out my kind of Intel career in college, studying Arabic and just what's going on, or what was going on and what still is going on in the Middle East. Decided to join the Marine Corps after college. So I became what's called a ground intelligence officer in the Marine Corps, which is kind of like we call it like all source. So it's everything from drones to snipers on the ground, all the intelligence collection capacity within a Marine Corps battalion. So a lot of cool experience there. Got out private sector and worked at a firm called Gavin DeBecker and Associates, doing executive protection, but more intelligence. So protective intelligence for high net worth individuals. And then after that, I met Jackie at a nonprofit organization. We were providing security consultation and intelligence to a community in Los Angeles of, I don't know the exact numbers. I think it's 700,000 plus, maybe more than that. But regardless, that's where I met Jackie. And again, we identified like a huge gap in the intelligence or private intelligence / investigative fields, which was open source intelligence. There's just a lot of misnomers about it and kind of what its capability is and what isn't. So we decided to establish Source Intelligence. Hit fast forward. Here we are. So thank you, Nate, for having us.
Excited to be here. And for those who don't know me, I think most folks on this webinar do, but I'm Nate Miller. I'm the CEO of Miller Inc. We're a full service strategic. Sorry, we have a little echo here. I think I'm not on. Is that right? I think we're okay now. I'm the CEO. We're a full service strategic communications firm. We work across earned, owned, and paid media. And within the firm, I personally run our crisis management practice, and we work with folks experiencing all kinds of crises, helping them prepare in the event of crises, from high-profile individuals and celebrities to corporate clients, nonprofits. We've had some government clients, all across the board, helping them to navigate everything from litigation, business disputes, HR issues, hack and leaks. Sort of you name it, we've seen it in the last decade, and so and So we're going to talk a little bit about that experience today. So if we go to the next slide, we'll get started. So we're going to share 5 or 6, I think 6 tips that we have for how to prepare for a crisis and navigate it effectively. So the first one is create a crisis management plan. If you're not thinking about all the scenarios ahead of time, you're not prepared. You should have a formal crisis management plan in place in your office, whether you're a small organization, a large organization, a nonprofit, for-profit, whether you're running a family office. You should take the time when you're not staring down the barrel of what is a crisis to think about, have you designated who is going to be the appropriate spokesperson for your organization in the event of a crisis? Have you trained your staff on how to field a report or a community call? Have you thought about what you're going to do in the event that there's a natural disaster or a man-made disaster, and and who's going to what the plan you're going to put in place will be? You have to take the time at the beginning of before a crisis strikes to really think about what policies you should have in place. We do this with a lot of clients. We go in and we assess all, we do scenario planning where we look at all the different potential scenarios that they could face. And we help come up with a rough blueprint. Now, when you get into a crisis, obviously you're going to have to make adjustments. You're going to have to change the plan a bit. But if you've done a lot of the big picture, high level thinking on the front end, you're going to be infinitely better positioned than if you haven't done it, on the front end. So that's the first thing, is take the time to create a crisis management plan. And we can talk more about it in the questions. And I will also say, we're going to take questions at the end of this. So if you have questions for Jackie or Xander or myself, please put them into the chat and we'll get those after we cover our 6 tips. Okay, next tip, turn it over to Jackie.
Sure. So this basically goes hand in hand with what Nate was saying in terms of creating a crisis management plan. And part of that is understanding what's out there, understanding your vulnerabilities, understanding your liabilities. And obviously in the digital age where we are right now, a lot of this happens to live online. I think we can pretty much separate, those vulnerabilities into kind of 3, I'd say, verticals. One would be reputational risks. Number 2 would be physical security risks. And number 3 would be cybersecurity risks. So really quickly going through each one. So the first, obviously, reputational risks. With the rise of social media, probably people in my generation understanding that MySpace was the first social media platform, and people had inappropriate pictures of, them drinking in college or little things like that where, could be a little bit funny, but they're not, especially when you're going through a crisis management, scenario. So you don't want to have those out there. The second would be physical security risks. So if something goes wrong, you want to make sure that no one can understand where you live. No one can get your personal phone number, your personal email address. We say that America is one of the best countries in the world, but it's the absolute least private countries in the world. I don't know if you've ever Googled yourself, but in probably a matter of 5 minutes, I can get all of your personally identifiable information, whether it's, again, your physical address, where your kids go to school, where your mom lives, your phone number, your office phone number, everything lives online in these data aggregation websites. And so that's pretty much, you need to take care of that. And we'll get into that in the next slide of how to do that. And then the third one is cybersecurity risks. So again, the same way that I can get your physical address, I can get your email address, which most likely means I could probably get, one of your old passwords. I could get your old usernames. I could get your old, social media handles, and that could lead to different liabilities and vulnerabilities that you, again, don't want to be facing. When you're facing a crisis, you want to mitigate those, vulnerabilities beforehand and take care of that before anything kind of blows up.
Something that we've done a lot with Sourced is with our, especially high profile clients, but not even so high profile.
Yeah.
Folks are amazed at what is online.
Yeah.
They never thought about, that picture I took 20 years ago, or that, or the fact that my address is everywhere. And then when they get into a crisis, that information can be used against them in really disturbing ways.
Exactly.
And so I think it's really important to have a professional like Source to look at that and help you understand what you can actually get offline. Most of it you can get offline.
Yeah, 100%. Just a little story, 2-second story is that my dog walker the other day posted a photo of my dog on Instagram and tagged me and said, you know, my dog's name is Kona and this and that. And I would say most likely people who have dogs, their dog's name is part of their password, you know, so you can utilize that information, whether it's, you know, you're standing in front of your car in a Instagram or a Facebook photo and it has the license plate, or even for high net worth individuals, for example, they take a photo outside their plane and I can see the tail number, right? I can go to a tool that's online and I can track exactly where you're flying. I can see your flight plans. If I'm a stalker with a high net worth individual, I can show up when the plane lands, you know, and that's a physical security risk and that's scary and you do not want that out there. So again, understanding what's out there and what can be used against you and taking that down, which is part of the next slide, is really, really critical in the crisis management plan.
Great.
And this is just furthering the slide before by erasing your digital footprint. So this is a huge, huge point. I think that people don't really understand the importance of it nowadays. Again, I, as open source intelligence specialist, can basically, you know, find about 20 data points on one person just from Googling your name. Even if you have a generic name, it's really not that hard if I know what city you live in and what your name is. Even more so if I don't know if you've erased your digital footprint, I could probably find out where you live because your spouse or your child or, you know, your grandchild is posting different things online. Again, I can collect those data points. So I don't want everybody to be so scared on this webinar, but it is possible to delete that information. Basically, especially it's probably easiest in California because we have the California Privacy Act, and California thankfully is spearheading the protection of, you know, your digital data. You can actually go to all of these data aggregation websites and delete yourself off of them. It's called opting out, and unfortunately in the States you have to opt out rather than opt in, like in Europe or something like that, or other places like that. So that's really important. Obviously, that's something that we do, and we do that with Miller Inc. With a lot of your clients. Again, I think it should be standard practice at this point across the board. You should delete your digital data offline. It's a little bit of a difficult process, but once you understand how to navigate it, you can do it. And it does take a little bit of maintenance, but that's something that Nate does, and we help Nate with that. And again, I think most importantly, this goes toward the physical security vertical of what I was speaking about before. If something happens, you don't want people to understand where you live. So if you're a CEO of a big company and there's an HR scandal that happens within your company, you don't want people coming to your house and protesting outside your house. It's not a good look. It's scary. You don't know who's going to show up. You don't know if it's going to be violent, if it has a propensity of violence. And that's just, it's, you know, you want to protect yourself. And this is definitely the first step to shielding your physical security. And then also, sorry, I know you want to jump in, Nate, but really quickly also reputation wise, you can get this stuff taken down as well. So let's say you do have that embarrassing photo on MySpace. You can deactivate and shut down your MySpace, and then you have to even go a step further and de-index it from Google, meaning that even Google can't get an archived or a cached version of that photo. So there are definitely steps, but there are ways to protect yourself online. And I want everybody on this webinar to understand that it's not a black hole. There is a solution. Obviously, there are some things that can't be deleted, that are considered public records, such as voting registration records, but there are other ways to mitigate that as well, such as SEO, disinformation campaigns, and kind of little tips and tricks that we know on the industry side.
Super important. And it's not just if you're a celebrity or running for public office or you're the CEO of a giant company. If you're an advocacy organization and there's people who strongly disagree with you, you don't want your executive directors address out there for people to, and people, this may sound paranoid, but I've seen it in action, how this information
Yeah,
is
we
used
worked
against
on
us.
a lot of projects together where it's scary. You don't want that information out there.
And so it's a really good, very low cost relative, solution to proactively get ahead of a lot of the issues that your organization may face.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm going to hand it over to Alex for this slide because he has the best experience in this realm.
Thank you, Jackie. And just to highlight kind of what Jackie just said with regards to erasing your digital footprint, kind of the way I break it down really simply in my simple brain is you can't attack what you can't see. So, the first line of defense is, which we'll get into, is the hacker or the stalker or the crazy person or whoever it is, just the person that has something, an agenda, is finding out the information of you or about you rather, taking that information and then putting into actual operation. So I'm going to jump in and talk about ensuring digital security and just avoid getting hacked, and then kind of bring up a couple case studies. And I'm going to do all this in under, I don't know, say like 3 to 5 minutes. So it's going to be a lot quickly. So just to kind of start it off, the fact of the matter is that everybody's data is compromised. That's a fact. It doesn't matter if you're a government official or, you're the world's richest man or woman, your data is compromised. A lot of people have this attitude is like, well, so what, like I'm not up to any, I'm not doing anything illegal. It really doesn't matter that my information's out there, or they just completely misunderstand what that means. And they think, well, I have a Facebook account and an Instagram account, but they're not thinking the way we're thinking. So the way I see it is, if you don't think your data has been compromised, you're wrong. And if you know your data has been compromised, there's much more out there than you think is out there. As a quick example, Jackie and I in our company, we have access to over 11 billion, and I think it's something more aligns about 14 billion different lines of breach data. So what is breach data? When you sign up for a specific account, let's say it's Instagram or Instacart or Uber, or whatever that is, you're providing X amount of information to that organization. So it's probably going to be your first, last name, your address, your credit card, your date of birth. So all the stuff that we're so used to inputting into these applications. That is being stored on a database that you can bet your bottom dollar one day it will get leaked or breached. It will happen. So you kind of have to think ahead and plan for that. Little Jackie and I have access, but not Little Jackie, both Little Jackie and Little Xander have access to over 11 billion records of this compromised data. So you can only imagine what like a hacker or, a criminal syndicate has with regards to access. So really quickly, how does hacking work? So step one of hacking, and it doesn't matter whether it's reputation, whether it's physical, or whether it's an actual cyber attack. Step one is always the same. It's always what we call recon or reconnaissance. So what the hacker is trying to do is really understand the person or the entity to find the weak points where they can penetrate. It works just like, African lions. It's the same exact thing. The hacker is going to go after the most vulnerable people, whether that's the older people that are less savvy, or maybe the brand new employee that just got hired that's going to say yes to everything because he's terrified of getting fired. Whatever it is, they're going to go after the most vulnerable people. So first thing you're going to do is to find out what's out there on an individual, on a specific individual. What is that person like? What do they subscribe to? Essentially, how can the hacker get them comfortable enough to click on something or to provide some information? So for example, if I go do something as simple as go on LinkedIn, I find the person that I want to target. This person has access to finances. Then I find that person on Facebook, and I find that they were in Disneyland last year with their wife and their baby daughter. That alone, then what I'm going to do is craft up probably some kind of email that's like a sweepstakes for a Disneyland vacation, something that allows them that, the key to the castle that gives them the comfort to click on something or initiate something. Now that's kind of a far-fetched example. Another example would be go on GoDaddy right now, GoDaddy.com. Search for the domain bankofamericacustomersupport.com. You can buy that for $19.99 right now today. Email all your buddies. You could craft the email in a nice way to make it more believable, but essentially they're going to see Bank of America customersupport.com, have no idea that you just purchased that domain. but it's really that easy. So reconnaissance is the first step. The next step is really engaging. Now, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of high profile hacks and cyber attacks start with social engineering. When people see hack on the news, they think of, some guy in a hoodie sitting at a computer, hacking away, or in like some cafe with a bunch of other, Russians or Chinese hackers. Yes, that does happen. That is a real thing. But most hacks are social engineering. And social engineering is just literally picking up the phone, calling somebody, identifying them first by doing reconnaissance, but calling them and extracting information out from that person or that group of people to then essentially escalate your level of access. The Twitter attack that took place, I don't know, maybe it was a year ago, where they took over Obama's account and 25 other huge high profile accounts, that was all done through social engineering. So that's a huge piece of it, is training your employees of what is social engineering, and then putting in stopgaps or two-factor authentication, where, if money's requested, that individual knows the procedure to coordinate with, person X and person Y to make sure to send that money out. So there are a lot of ways to mitigate that, but social engineering is truly one of the most utilized methods that starts the hacking process. Just a couple more things. So some of the things that we see in data breaches when it comes to engaging the actual victim is you'll always see common themes. One, the hacker is going to try to initiate fear. That's always number one. I have this password of yours. I have you on adult websites. They're going to initiate some kind of fear elicitation. The second thing they're going to do is they're going to say there's no time. If you don't do this by this time, this is going to happen. Right away, if you see one or two of those things, that's a huge red flag. Stop everything. That's probably an 8 out of 10 chance that is some kind of fraudulent activity. Obviously, you're going to see typos. We get emails, we work on cyber cases where I'm looking through the email chain thinking, how the heck did this employee not notice like all of these weird little typos? And, it's definitely not, legitimate. And then, of course, looking at the email address, if it's Miller Inc. and there's 2 Ks, that's a huge attack surface that people do all the time. They go out and they buy the domain, make it very similar. They buy the domain like the day prior to the attack, and then they go on the offensive. So just to kind of close up on all this is, what can you do about all this stuff? And honestly, the answer is way easier than you think it is. So number one, strong passwords. I know half the people in the audience probably just rolled their eyes like, come on, it can't be that easy. Strong passwords. Let me give you a quick example. If I make a password right now, that's all lowercase letters with 4 random numbers. It'll take a computer 24 hours to crack that password. If I add 1 capital character to that password, it now takes 7 months for a computer to crack that password. If I add 1 special character, it now takes 400 years. If I had 3 special characters, it's 2 million years. So those teeny little changes in the password have just drastically increased your survivability in some kind of password stuffing attempt or whatever the attack surface is. So number one is strong passwords. Number 2 is a password manager. Get a password manager. We all use Dashlane. It's a great enterprise level solution where you can govern the passwords within an organization or you as an individual. So I'm not going to pitch Dashlane. There's a lot of other platforms out there. We go with Dashlane. Number 3, which is a no-brainer. Go into every single account you have and turn on 2-factor authentication. That is the number one thing we see every time. If you turn on 2-factor authentication, you are 50% more secure than you were before. And then the last 2 kind of pieces of advice before I pass it back, because I'm definitely going over my 5 minutes. When you see the note that says, remember this device, do you want me to remember this device? Yes or no? When you log into something, always click no. It is storing a very unique key. And if that key is stolen, somebody can get into your Bank of America or your Facebook without the username and the password. All they need is that key. So do not remember the session. And then the final thing is just monthly. Go into each one of your accounts, go to settings, privacy and security, and just start snooping around and poke around. It's made for all of us, normal people to look at. It's not some coder, coder's paradise. So head in there and kind of just do a sanity check on everything, make sure everything's activated and good to go. So that's as much information as I can spill out there. I can talk for hours on this, but yeah, that's essentially a great way to ensure proper security and really preemptively avoid getting hacked.
Super important, and we've brought sourced in after the fact, where we've had business espionage cases of people being hacked, both by, hackers abroad, but also by business rivals. I mean, frankly, and it's amazing to see how many people are doing this thing, which is illegal. And whether you're a nonprofit or a business organization or a private person, you really need to think about this. And ensure that you have the right security in place because it's a real vulnerability. All right, we're going to go to our final 2 tips, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. I'll just remind everyone now, excited to take your questions. Please put them into the chat, and then we will get to all your questions, and excited to have a conversation with you all. 5, this tip for me is really important. We've seen when we run the media side of a crisis response. So often, the main vulnerability is a reporter will call an organization and either not get a response or get a response from an unauthorized spokesperson. I've had more than one time when a reporter showed up somewhere, a news crew showed up somewhere, and they'll get, if it's a big real estate company, the on-site supervisor just happens to be there, and they didn't think the reporter was there, and they asked the question, and the supervisor just sort of talked to the reporter. And and they look at the nightly news that night, and it says that organization's name, and it has an employee there and their face, and they're describing it. And this happens way more than you think, because people aren't used to dealing with the media, and when a crisis happens, there's been no time to actually translate to them what the policy is, is and how to put it in place. So first of all, it's really important you have a media policy. I recommend that your media policy is only authorized spokespeople are allowed to engage with media. That's the first thing that should be in your employee handbook. You should have a training for everybody that comes into the organization that clearly articulates that expectation. And as part of that training, what we like to do for all of our clients is create a little index card that sits by a phone or lives on someone's computer, where it describes to them what to do in the event that a reporter calls. And basically what it describes for them to do, you can do this for each organizations, is to say, I'm not an authorized media spokesperson, and then take down that reporter's information, and you say, someone will get back to you, and you let the team know that they have to pass along that information immediately. So often what happens is a reporter will call, the person will just be going about their day, they'll forget to pass it on to the supervisor till the next day, and by that time, there's already a story. So really important that you have that policy in place and that you train your staff to implement it. And then obviously, for people who are going to be spokespeople for the media, we like to do a much more robust media training on how do you engage and tips and tricks and things like that. But you should do that before a crisis. All right, we're going to number 6. A social media policy. This is another thing. Important on the front end to communicate to your team what your expectations are as it relates to their personal social media accounts. This can be awkward. It feels weird to tell your employees what they can or can't do on their personal page, but most organizations will have an NDA in place. So, you have to let people know that they're not supposed to talk about potentially private things at work on their personal accounts, and those could be used against the organization. And also to remind folks that they are ambassadors of your organization. So often I see people get in trouble when they have people in the organization who don't necessarily understand that, and they sort of are operating like it's still spring break in college, and they're putting things on social media that maybe aren't appropriate for their job.
Can I add something to this as well? We see many cases where people are using their work credentials, like their work email, to register for these social media accounts, and that's also probably a big no-no. You really want to separate, or you want to make sure your employees are separating their business accounts and their work accounts and their personal accounts. Again, just because that can lead to a leak of multiple points of information as well.
Super important point. And also, what we see is people on social media, sometimes they'll be posting things that can be inappropriate or confident or hurtful or other things. So just really,
Well, just popped into my head as well. Like, if an employee is taking a selfie in front of their computer saying first day at work, hashtag, Miller Inc., hashtag computer or whatever, A lot of attackers can utilize that photo in order to gain, entry to certain computers. They could see what browser you're using, what computers you're using, what software you're using. If there's a photo of your dog in the background, it always comes back to the dogs. I would say. But yeah, that's also important. You don't want the inside of your office to be shown, and you can get a lot of information from just one picture.
Super important. So have a social media policy, communicate it, make sure people understand what the expectations are, and you'll be in a much better position, to avoid future crises. Okay, we have some questions that have come in. First question, I think this is for Xander and Jackie. What are the top cybersecurity threats that impact operations?
Alex, you want to take this one?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it kind of fits perfectly into the sequence of the slides. I think the most, but there's two that we see most frequently. The first one is we see, so it's really wire fraud. We see this a lot with organizations, and honestly a lot with nonprofit organizations. What the hacker will do is they will hack into the email server, and they won't do anything. They'll just sit there and they'll watch and wait, and they'll see operations going back and forth and in transactions going back and forth, and they'll wait for that one opportunity, like, oh, this person is about to wire money to this person, and then they interdict and they take the email off the server and they start a whole new chain, and the victim thinks that they're talking to the original, the person that it should go to, but really they're talking to the hacker. We see that a lot. The red flags are so obvious, and every time we see these cases afterwards, it's like, come on, guys, how did you not see this? So that's number one. I would say the other type of the most common attack that we see is kind of going back to everyone's information is compromised. So they'll find you on LinkedIn as a huge attack surface, and I'm on LinkedIn. We're all on LinkedIn. Huge attack surface. You find that one employee, do a little bit of research, you find their username, your password. Then you find out what systems they're using, what social media accounts they're on, all that stuff. And you just start trying their email address and their password on every single one. And you will get into one eventually. And what people don't understand is when somebody gets into one account, their intent is rarely that one account. The intent is to then spider web out from there and start attacking different accounts, or starting to target your friends and contacts within that, so they can social engineer them to give them information, if that makes sense, because that's the comfort there. Now that person thinks they're talking to me or to Jackie or whoever. So I think what we see the most are those two types of scenarios.
Great. Keep the questions coming in. We have a couple more, but please keep sharing your questions. We'll try to get to all of them. Okay, next question. Technology is constantly changing. How do you stay up to date with the latest technological advancements and security threats?
I can take that one.
Great.
So you're 100% right. Technology is always changing, meaning that the threat surfaces are always changing, and someone's always going to be able to penetrate those systems. However, a few things. I'd say number one, it's really important to update your devices. I know that it's so annoying when you get a message on your computer saying we need to update the software. There's a new software that came out. Make sure you update it. The reason why they're sending you that message is because they've detected a vulnerability somewhere and they've patched it up, and you want to make sure that you have that patch on your devices, mainly your tablet, your phone, your computer. Secondly, again, we all understand that technology is a huge part of our lives at this point in time. You can't avoid using technology or social media or using the web. We don't really kind of walk around with tinfoil hat saying, throw away your phone, never use it because it's an attack surface. We understand that it's part of our everyday life. So what you really have to do is those three things that Xander mentioned before. One, complex passwords. Again, we cannot highlight that enough. Make sure it's more than 8 characters, a capital letter, lowercase, a special character, and a number. It definitely helps. Second, password manager. Again, it helps with those complex passwords, and it just kind of keeps everything organized and packaged, and just makes you way more secure right off the bat. And then 3, which is the most important, is 2FA. As Alex said, it makes you 50% safer. Again, that it notifies your phone when someone's trying, or I mean, there are different ways that, you know, you can use 2FA, but an example of it, it sends a text saying, are you trying to get into your Gmail? And then you have to authorize that permission. So those are the three things. Again, it's constantly changing, but the technology we use is also evolving with that. And you just have to keep up to date with the security settings and those three tips that we definitely highlighted and shoved down your throat at this point.
Thanks, Jackie. Okay, keep the questions coming. We have another one now. Why is it important for organizations to have a crisis management team in place before a crisis strikes? This is super important. Let me just take this. There was a quote from someone who used to work at the State Department who said, it's important to bring your crisis and comms team, for the takeoffs, not just the emergency landings. And too often we get brought into a situation where we are shaking hands and meeting people for the first time when they're in the middle of a disaster or crisis, and that there's a lot of issues with that. First, it takes time to build trust with the crisis team. You want to make sure that you sort of know each other, you understand each other. You want your crisis team to already know your organization when they're coming into the situation because they can advise you much better. You want to have those policies and procedures in place around who's going to speak on behalf of the organization. You want to have done a lot of research ahead of time so that people understand what are our vulnerabilities. It's very hard for me to play chess and help advise someone as a crisis manager if I don't know, if I move in this way, if I don't know everything about what that move would look like. Now, in a crisis, you try to get that information as quickly as possible and get up to speed and make the right decision. But if you prepare it ahead of time, and I've had a full look into the organization, I've examined all the vulnerabilities, it makes it much easier for me to advise them. And then the other thing I'll say is, in moments of crisis, people aren't always the best decision makers.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I was listening to a podcast recently about how cortisol comes into your body and stresses you out, and it's really good for a flight or flight. But when people are really stressed, often the rational part of their brain doesn't always turn on. They're emotional. They feel under threat, under attack, and so it's hard for them to sometimes look clearly. And when you've already done a lot of the thinking before the crisis happens, and you understand, okay, X happened, and therefore we're going to do Y, and you've thought about all the costs and benefits of that specific decision, it helps people in that moment to be like, oh yeah, we decided that. I'm good with that decision, and then you make little tweaks here and there depending on what the specifics of the situation are. So really important for all of those reasons to have the team in place. Hire a crisis management team to do the crisis plan for you. It's not that expensive, and it will pay huge dividends if you ever have to use it. So it's a strong recommendation we have, and I've seen in practice, those clients that we have that have done that prep ahead of time are so much further ahead than those who have not, and it's ultimately much less expensive to actually do the prep.
Yeah.
I think we've hit time. I want to thank everybody for joining us for this webinar. We're going to make this available as a recording for you to share with friends and colleagues if you'd like. I want to thank Jackie and Xander again for joining us. We're really enjoying these, and we'll see you next quarter with our next webinar. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you for having me.